Problem-based learning, grown in popularity as a strategy. So in the 70s, professors at medical schools developed the basic idea. The results were impressive, and then they were adopted at other locations. They've also been adopted outside of medical school settings. Problem-based learning, it is a situation or a type of learning teaching strategy where the best short answer to the question is that PBL, the problem, comes first. This means that the first thing students are given is not a lot of information about a subject, but a realistic problem in the form of a case study. This ideally is a problem that students might actually encounter later in their personal or professional work. In medical schools, this reverses the long tradition of having students study only content information during the whole first 2 years of their curriculum, waiting until the third year before they start working on the kinds of problems they will encounter in clinical practice. Once students have their problem, they begin working, usually in groups, to answer some key questions, such as what systems or topics seem to be involved here? What do we already know? What do we not know? How can I learn about the system or subsystem? How can I use my understanding of the general system and this particular situation to analyze and diagnose the problem? What solution or therapy seems appropriate? Tutors are frequently, but not always, employed to help students learn how to engage in these questions. Learning how to work through the right questions in the right sequence is very important. And these are all questions or skills that professional practitioners continually confront in their work. So figure 4.10, this is a sequence of activities that might be created in a problem-based learning situation. In class, groups are presented with a problem. They decide what information and ideas are needed. Out of class, students individually seek new information and ideas. In class, the groups collect and apply new information and ideas to original problem. Students review solutions outside of class, and then groups present solutions to teacher and the rest of the class. Now, what is happening in problem-based learning in terms of the holistic model of active learning? The sequence starts with a realistic case problem. That is a simulated doing experience, as shown here in figure 411. Then students work back and forth through the other two components, reflective dialogue about the subject and the learning process, and finding new information and ideas about the subject. Eventually, students return to the original situation and try to analyze and solve the problem. If the process includes a full review of the learning process at the end, they'll contain all three major components of active learning. Also started in this slide here is the concept of accelerated learning. This is a relatively new approach that nonetheless clearly qualifies as an instructional strategy. Using findings from recent brain research and ideas on multiple intelligences, individuals have created a 6-step master plan for accelerated learning. And I'll let you read through these, but the topics are motivate your mind, acquire the necessary information, search out the meaning, trigger the memory, exhibit what you know, and reflect on your learning experiences. I'm going to give you about 5 seconds of dead air for you to pause the recording and then read through the individual components. It is not easy to identify specific in and out of class activities from the master list description and translate it into the castle top diagram, although that presumably could be done. It is easier to relate the sequence of events in this teaching strategy to the model of active learning as shown here. So in figure 412, we see the sequence of events in accelerated learning. There is the accelerated learning starting here at number 1, right? Motivating the mind. And then we go to number 2, acquiring the necessary information. Number 3, searching out the meaning. And number 4, reflecting on what you've learned. Again, this sequence begins with students engaging in some personal reflection to get into the right frame of mind. Then they work on acquiring the necessary information and ideas using an appropriate learning style. This is followed by activities aimed at meaning making by engaging in various kinds of experiences, depending on which of the various multiple intelligences are available and appropriate. The meaning is then linked with various memory strategies to get the learning into long-term memory. Once this has been accomplished, students exhibit what they know, which is a form of reflective dialogue with others. The final recommended procedure is for students to individually reflect on what they've learned, which is, in essence, reflective dialogue with self. These three examples of instructional strategies point up the difference between an instructional strategy and a teaching technique and show why a strategy is by far the more important. Teachers still need to be effective and proficient with whatever techniques they use, but it is the particular way those techniques and learning activities are combined and sequenced that determines whether a course creates synergy among its component parts. It is the strategy that creates the energy necessary for significant learning, not the techniques themselves. So for teachers who want a truly powerful course, the textbook author says think technique, not to think technique, but to think strategy. Okay, we're moving on to step number 8 now. The final step in the intermediate phase of the course design process is to integrate the course structure and the instructional strategy into an overall scheme of learning activities. In doing this, it can be helpful to create a diagram that combines the course structure and the instructional strategy. So that's what we're seeing here in figure 413, overall scheme of learning activities, thinking about things that are done in class and outside of class for each of the major topics of the course, and doing so in 1 to 3 week blocks of time. This diagram indicates that one needs to identify the main topics, select an effective sequence of learning activities that stretch out over, again, those 1 to 3 weeks of class, and then repeat the strategy for each of the main topics. The overall scheme of learning activities naturally needs to be adjusted to fit the time structure and circumstances for any given teaching situation. But all courses need some kind of overall scheme that takes the chosen strategy and applies it to each of the main topics that make up the structure of the course. Now, in this following diagram, there is another important principle of good course design to consider: the need for differentiation and integration among learning activities. The need for differentiation shows up in 2 ways. First, the course needs variety in the types of learning activities from day to day within each topical block of time. Courses in which all the class sessions do more or less the same thing have a low level of differentiation. Second, the course needs a pattern of development in the complexity and challenge of the learning. As students move through the sequence of topics, they need to work on problems and learning tasks that become increasingly more complex and reflect the interaction among the topics encountered. The course needs integration, both within each topical block of time and in the progression through each of the topical units. That is, the individual activities need to be connected as they work toward the conclusion of each topical unit, and the topic of each new unit needs to be connected and integrated with the preceding topics as the sequence works toward the conclusion of the whole course. Once you have developed this general scheme of learning activities for the whole course, you can lay out a more detailed week-by-week schedule of activities for the whole term. So this exhibit 4.5 can be helpful. Now this format can be adjusted to the time and structure of a given course. For example, if your course meets twice a week for 15 weeks, or for 4 weekends in a row, the form needs to be adjusted to reflect that schedule accordingly. So what activities need to come first? That is, how should the course begin? This will allow you to identify the learning activities for the first week or 2. After deciding how to start the course, you use the process of backward design for the rest of the course. What activities do you want to conclude with? That is, how should the course end? You want a good culminating project in the last week or two that will challenge the students to use everything that they've learned to solve the challenging problem or answering a challenging big question for the course. The final task is, or the final phase, I should say, the 4 tasks that finish the design. So now that the intermediate phase of the design process has been finished, you need to take care of the 4 remaining tasks to complete and refine the design of the course. And so looking at step 9 first, develop the grading system. So the textbook author urged the development of a feedback assessment system, an assessment system that goes beyond just grading and contributes to the learning process. Teachers in nearly all institutions still need to turn in grades. For my institution and others that I've worked for, grades are a way of establishing minimum criteria, showing that students are able to master a minimal level of competency. And again, I think that's for public safety purposes. We want people to be able to do things at a particular level. We want to also make sure, though, that their grading is reflective of something that's appropriate. And of course, in the PT world, probably in the OT world too, they have to take a national licensure exam, and those ask questions. And many times they're in multiple choice format, and they might even have case reports associated with them too, that they've got to see the case and then, based upon the case presentation, answer several questions. So this exhibit here just shows a particular grading system for a geography course, and again, just illustrating the number of points that are available. You're used to seeing things like these in your course syllabi. Step 10, debug the possible problems. So it's always good before implementing the course to give it one final check and review. Are there any operational problems that you can identify and correct ahead of time? It is not always easy to detect operational problems in advance, but when you can, it avoids trouble later on. Step 11, write the course syllabus. Once you have the course designed and ready to go, you need to communicate information about the course to students. This means writing a course syllabus that contains the information students need in order to understand what the course is all about. So, this is your general management information, goals for the course, structure and sequence of class activities, text and other required reading materials, grading procedures, and course policies. And again, a lot of these things will have certain boilerplate language that your institution will want to include in there, such as accessing learning support services for individuals that might have those needs. Step 12, plan and evaluation of the course and of your teaching. Every time you teach, you have an opportunity to learn about teaching and about yourself as a teacher. To take advantage of this opportunity to learn and grow, you need to plan a thorough evaluation of the course itself and of your own teaching. And this means going well beyond simply looking at the means from student ratings at the end of the course. For starters, you could do a midterm assessment. You could collect information from the students in the middle of the course as well as at the end. This kind of formative assessment will allow you to address any major concerns students might have while there's still time to implement changes. Multiple sources of information. When you're trying to assess quality of your teaching, it is important to consider multiple sources. The easiest and most common resource is to collect questionnaires from students, but it's also possible for someone, either from a teacher or someone else, to interview the whole class or a representative sample of students. The small group instructional diagnosis is designed specifically for this purpose. Besides collecting information from students, it's interesting to audio tape or videotape a class session to find out what really happens, what you do, and how you talk while leading the class. In addition, a careful analysis of patterns of correct and incorrect responses on tests can sometimes identify particular areas of learning or non-learning that are critical for student success. Having a colleague or an instructional consultant observe your teaching and give you feedback can also contribute special insights. These are people who do not have to worry about doing the work of the teacher or the students. Hence, they can bring their extensive knowledge of the subject and of teaching in general to bear on the task of identifying what is going well and what you might do to improve. Finally, as you formulate questions, either for the students or for the outside observers, it can be helpful to focus your attention on four important aspects. To what degree are your goals being achieved? How effective are particular learning activities in your overall instructional strategy? Are feedback and assessment procedures helpful and fair? How effective do you interact with your students? With that, you have finished all three phases of the course design process. If all has gone well, you should have a plan of teaching and learning activities that is both feasible and powerful. It'll be one that is possible for both you and the students to implement and will achieve significant kinds of student learning. Now, the remainder of the course chapter, I'll give you an opportunity to review through if you so desire. And what I'm going to do is just give about 5 seconds of dead air for each section, and you can either read through as it presents here, or you can read through your textbook.